Good evening. Welcome to DiversiTV. I'm Mark Harris, your host, and I'll be introducing our guest tonight. If you're just tuning in to DiversiTV for the first time, welcome. And if you are one of our growing legion of audience, welcome back. Tonight our show is a bit of what some of my diversity trainer friends refer to as intersectionality, where usually under the diversity rubric you basically deal with either race, class, gender, et cetera, separate issues. Well, tonight we basically have an intersectional issue where we're focusing on one particular ethnic population as it relates to prison services, treatment, prevention, and responses to re-entry into civilian life, as it were. If you could go to slide. So our mission is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And to that end, we basically go from, we usually start with a native perspective. Each season, the seasons roughly correspond to LCC terms. We start the shows the second week of every term. This is our 5th season. So Native, Anglo, Africans in America, Latino. Tonight's show basically is the show that we're going to be dealing with in terms of a Native prison art show that's currently being exhibited in town, and to draw attention to that. Next week we'll look at gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, intersex, two-spirit populations. November 19th we'll deal with disability, youth on the 26th, just before Thanksgiving. December 3 class, and the 10th, our finals week, spirituality and religion. And our guest tonight is Myrna Taylor, who is a Red Lodge Transition Services board member. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So what is your national affiliation? Some people say tribe.
Yes, I am Cherokee.
Okay. All right. How did you get involved with Red Lodge?
I was an inmate at Coffee Creek I was incarcerated for 37 months. And Trish Jordan, our program director, brings ceremony into the prison. And it was there that I found out about Red Lodge, and I knew when speaking with her that I needed to do something when I got out. Prison was an extremely eye-opener for me. It opened up, I had a very set view of what prison was like, who was there, and then when I went...
Before you went.
Yeah, before I went, and then when I got there, it was, these are people, these are my sisters, these are human beings, and I knew that my goal was to serve the people in whatever way, whatever capacity I'm able to. So that's how I got involved.
So let me pick up on several things that you said. Okay, when you say that you had a view of prison before you went in, can you talk about that?
Well, I just assumed, like everyone else, or most people, that you did something wrong, quit whining and go do your time. I also assumed with the amount of taxes I paid that people's basic needs are met, and that if there are issues that send them to prison, that those issues would be dealt with, would be addressed, because we don't want them coming back.
Worse.
Yeah, it's right. and I found out that was far from the case.
When Trish brings ceremony into prison, so certainly when we were talking at the gallery the other day, when you were talking about sometimes the differences between, like, for example, a lot of mainstream Christian organizations go into prison. And I've done cultural visits for African American groups in OCI, etc. What do you mean by ceremony? Because Native American spirituality does not necessarily have the same standing, or certainly hasn't had the same standing, you know, recognition as being valid, you know, as, say, Christianity or the Abrahamic religions.
It still doesn't, and
Yeah.
it's something we struggle with all the time. Trish would come in, and some other ladies would come in, and we would have sweat once a month. She would actually come from Lewiston, Idaho, to bring us into the lodge. For many of us, it was the first time. And
was it your first time, too?
It was my first time, yes. I'd been totally removed from any Native culture. My mother's white, and I was brought up that way. And so when I went in, it was, this is home, this is where I belong, and I knew that. But Trish also, the Longhouse people had been gracious enough to come in for the food feasts. So we've had those for, I think, the last 3 years. I was able to attend the first one. It was amazing. And then once a week, sometimes, not so often now because we have different people there, but the ladies are able to go out and smudge.
Okay.
So
Within the prison.
Within the prison, yes.
Very important in terms of the vibes that need to be cleared.
It's
nearly constantly.
It makes all the difference. I mean, the officers, all the staff, you could tell the difference when you would have a sweat. When somebody was able to come in, we'd go back to our unit, and you know, that's what you think about. You have a lot of time on your hands, and you have to fill it up and going towards the spiritual and finding out who you are and finding out what your people are about, what they believe, what their practice. For the whole month, I mean, it would make the difference in the unit. There's more peace. I mean, you could. It was almost tangible. You could almost feel it in the air. And for many of the women, their families had been so hurt and destroyed by whether it was the boarding school environment, their parents going, the alcoholism and drugs, that those families, out of respect for ceremony, had removed themselves, and so a lot of their children don't know about ceremony. So you're getting people that are lost, and that when the hard times of life come, there's no place for them to go. Christianity doesn't fit for me. I know it does for many people, and I think that's good. But for me, I tried on the outside before I went to prison. I tried very hard to be a good Christian, and there was always still that hole. And I worked it all on the outside, but there still was always that hole. And so when I went to Coffee Creek, it actually was one of the greatest blessings in my life for that reason, not the prison itself, but the actual finding my connection back to my people and knowing expectations, what is expected of me as a Native woman. Trish talks about many things. We've been taught a lot of things, whether it's talking circles or whatever it is. In prison there's things inside you that have to come out, and in the lodge that's the safe place to do it, and you can put those hurts and those pains from generations, all of it, you can put it on the grandfathers, and that's why when you come out, everything is so different. Everything is just completely different.
It should be said that prison is really designed to destroy your spirit.
Absolutely.
The level of dehumanization that you experience once you're in there certainly can't compare to being out and what happens to you before. So with Native people in particular, where our ways, like for example with ceremony, the ways of healing the hurt so ceremony is designed to actually deal with those traumas and give you a place to express those in a safe, contained way, and give you something to fill that hole that you find that Western culture doesn't necessarily give us in particular. Can you talk about what, and because this is the correction system, right? So if you've done something wrong, it's supposed to have corrected that at a level that once you get out, then you've paid your debt to society, as it were, and that you're a different person, and theoretically you're not going to commit crimes again. But how did you get in and then contrast? I mean, because it's ironic that then you get cultural meaning inside a place that's designed to destroy your spirit. So tell us something of that.
Well, about my crime?
Yeah.
My husband, we were married for almost 25 years, and my husband committed suicide, and I could not deal with it. I did well for the first 2 years because I was busy trying to pull everything together. I went back to school. In fact, I actually came to Lane and went to school, and I started to drink the summer of 2003. Not a lot, but I drank a little bit. And then I found out that I had a disease from when I was a child. When I was 13, I got this disease in it, and it's I will die from it. And I found out I was late stage. And all the things in my life, I couldn't handle. There was nothing, nowhere I could go, no one I could share it with, not my family members, not a church, there was nowhere for me to go, and I lost hope.
And it's major stuff. I mean, 2 deaths plus your own impending death, and how do you even begin to process that? And I was trying to figure out how to take care of my grandchildren, I mean, the whole thing, it was just overwhelming to me. I had nowhere. So I started to drink, and when they told me I was late stage, I left my home and drank for 3 weeks and had an accident. I hurt a young lady, and thank God she did not die, but I hurt her severely and ended up being arrested for drinking and driving, and was sent to Coffee Creek. I got 44 months and I did 37. That was your first offense? Yes, yes. Excuse me, I'm missing something. I'm a substance abuse treatment professional. So one of the things that happens, usually with people is we want treatment, right? Especially if it's a first offense. So I mean, okay, you're referring to it as your crime. I understand that, right? And yeah, you hit somebody, you injured them, didn't kill them. Thank God. But you get sent not to treatment, but to 44 months in prison. Right. First offense. First offense, yeah. So there are lots of repeat drunk driving offenders that don't get sent to prison. So, well, maybe we won't get into why that is. Yeah, it was a lot of political things. It was a lot of political things. The young lady's father is a retired Douglas County sheriff. Okay. And her mom was friends with the governor, and she was an OSU gymnast. Okay. So I didn't hit the drunk, and not to make light of that, because it really isn't funny. Yeah. But not too long after that, a young lady from OSU actually hit a young lady. She was 16 years old and killed her. And she did less than 2 years. So there was in prison? Yeah, she did go to prison. Okay. But she went and she took off, hid her car for 2 weeks, and called her mom in California, and they got an attorney, and so she was given a plea bargain. Less time. Less time, yes, far less time than mine. Let's skip over that for a second. Okay. All right, and you're in Coffee Creek. Yes. And treatment services there?
No, no. When I went in, they have a really small intake process. I was really surprised. And she asked me about my husband's death, and I started to cry, and she said, well, you're depressed. And I said, well, yeah, I'm depressed. I'm in prison.
Right.
It's a very depressing place. And she asked me if I wanted medication, and I said no. And that was it. That was the extent.
That was treatment.
That was treatment. That was their offer, was to medicate me. And I knew that wasn't going to help. I tried the medication with the alcohol. It doesn't work. Yeah.
So how soon after that did you get exposed to Red Lodge then?
Oh, it was probably 3 or 4 months. And I stayed angry. The first year I was angry. I was angry at my own family members. I was angry at the system. I was angry at myself. I was ashamed and humiliated and embarrassed that I would be in such a place. And so it took me a year to process all of that out to where I could actually use the ceremony for what it's intended to be used for that healing.
So we won't go into the history of why how long it took to get such services in ceremonies and culturally appropriate services within the prison system. So, but obviously, if they knew that it was substance abuse related, and there are units that do substance abuse in corrections, or they have had that in the past. So no treatment services were offered to you, other than drugs. So essentially, you had to formulate your own recovery through some other culturally specific services like Red Lodge. So part of our topic today is like prison art. So what's your art?
I do a lot of beadwork.
Okay.
I do.
You wearing your pieces?
No, actually, this was a gift from Stu, and and this actually came out of the prison. He had this made for me, out of OSP.
Okay. Let's see some of the prison art, if you would. And maybe we could provide the voiceover. So we have some slides, some examples of prison art. And feel free to chime in if you recognize any of the pieces. Yeah.
Well, I recognize them all.
They're currently in the gallery down on Broadway.
Yes.
Yeah, and
most of the artwork has come from OSP, the men's prison. They have done a fabulous job of supporting us. So they have sent us hundreds of pieces, not just OSP, all throughout the prison center system. The men have been
14
phenomenal.
prisons within Oregon.
Yeah.
Basically, all of them have sent some representative art. And so if you look at the subjects, like you talked about on the drive down, your Sportster.
Yes. Their wishes, The artwork, when you're in there, I don't know that it's so much therapy. Maybe it is for some folks.
Well, it makes sense that it would be therapy.
But it's also something that you can give, something that a piece of you that you can send outside.
Yeah.
And what's so phenomenal about this is that we're not allowed to have anything. This is done in pen. So you have little pens that you use. There's you can use colored pencils, but that's it.
That's it.
And some of this artwork, you would not believe it. I mean, it doesn't. It's like, how can you create that from a colored pencil, or a pencil drawing? They're just so talented.
And it's the expression of spirit that comes through your art, especially since one could say, well, you don't have anything else to do. Well, you could.
Sure.
There are other things, to get involved with, the stereotypical weightlifting, et cetera, et cetera. But, art is definitely an expression of spirit in a place that dehumanizes you. It can be said that all of the pieces of art that you've seen are available for sale and are being exhibited at the at 174 West Broadway, the Red Lodge Gallery. And so the exhibit features art from 14 different prisons with, one of the things that we can comment on in terms of the Invisible People art show, 174 West Broadway. November 7th, First Friday Art Walk. You can see it there, 6 to 9 p.m. On November 8th, Elizabeth Woody, who is a native poet, will be doing her poetry at 1 p.m. And later that afternoon, Barriers to Reentry at 3 p.m., a talk then. It's November 15th, Robert Miller at 1 p.m. And November 15th, A Historical Perspective. Myrna, you can talk about some of the things that go on in prison in terms of one of the things that we look at, or we talked about over the weekend, was how prison's a toxic environment. In that, when you were a taxpayer, and you're a taxpayer now too, right? So when you thought about, before you went into prison, how much money was going to, maintain inmates, and then once you got in, you found out how little of it actually goes to the inmate, at least in terms of, one, sanitation, basic hygiene, things like that. Can you talk about some of that?
Well, I was amazed at the fact that they would pinch pennies and lose dollars. There's MRSA, penicillin-resistant staph infection in the prisons, and that has to be contained.
Right. And there's a proper medical and basic sanitation procedure for containing it. So you have access to those kind of things? No.
When I first went in medium, there's two sections to Coffee Creek, medium and minimum. You go in as to intake on the medium side, and then if you're good, then you go over to minimum. In minimum, they have little bars of soap, and they break them up. There's a big box, and so you can wash your hands, throw away the piece of soap, and you're good to go. I got over to minimum, and the girls started to do that, and they actually got in trouble for breaking up the soap, and they threw the whole box away and wouldn't let us use it at all. And so they expected us to use each other's hand soap.
Wait a minute. Inmates sharing soap? Yes. What if one of the inmates is infected?
There were women infected there, and it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. They finally had to get a doctor came in and did he worked for the state of Oregon, and he said no more of that. And so they've got, right before I left, they changed it and they're using pumps. But there's...
Of antibacterial soap?
Well, no, just soap.
Okay, so bars of soap, institutional bars, a very simple thing. How, we're building, there's 14 prisons. We're building two or more every couple of years, right?
Yes.
For, essentially, a lot of those are substance abuse related crimes, which need I go onto the soapbox about treatment is the way to deal with a medical condition, not incarceration, but all right, so right.
That
Individual soap doesn't seem like it costs that much, and basic hand washing is a major hygienic tool, and they're not giving you bars of soap. What else are they not doing?
Well, when you go in, they give you used clothing. I understand that, but they give you used undergarments, and I'm sorry, that's just nasty for women, especially to have. And until you get money on your books, which it takes time to get a job, and then it takes time for that money to get on your books, and then
people can't send you money if you have family.
Yes, if you have family members that have money, they can send it, but it takes a while for it to get on your books. It takes a while for you. When I first went in, intakes were not allowed to buy off canteen. So
the prison store, should be said.
The prison store, yes. And so when you first go in, they give you, or they used to, I don't know what they're doing now, but they give you a toothbrush, a little tiny black comb. They would give you baking soda to brush your teeth and as a deodorant, and then
wait, double duty?
Double duty. Yeah, it was pretty gross. But there's no washcloths. You have to buy your own washcloths off of canteen. You know, it's pitiful. I mean, it's pitiful. I cannot believe that the money that I have paid, that my husband paid as taxpayers, that people weren't provided for, just basic.
Because we're talking about, you know,
no
tens
shampoo.
of thousands of dollars per inmate
Right.
per year. So
Right.
we can't afford bars of soap and washcloths with that.
Right.
So basic hygiene to prevent disease. No shampoo.
No cream rinse. In fact, and you're not supposed to. If you get caught, you'll get in trouble. You cannot share, which just is a whole nother. I don't understand that. You cannot share anything. And so when an intake comes in, sometimes they'll find a package on their bed, because we're not going to let people go without.
Yeah.
We're just not. So they'll find little packages on their bed with shampoo and what we can do for them, an extra washcloth. And if they get caught with it, they'll get in trouble.
Okay. So in the 21st century, we're essentially dealing with 18th century conditions.
Yes. Yes.
So we're concentrating disease, MRSA.
Yes.
So you alluded to this. You had a medical condition coming into the prison.
Yes.
So how was that dealt with?
At first it wasn't, and I had an attorney actually call and inquire why I wasn't getting treatment, and I ended up being picked up from minimum and put back in medium. And I thought, oh, good, you know, well, this is where the medical department is. Maybe, you know, they're going to start my treatment. And no, it was a punishment. I stayed over there for 7 months. And
you were punished for asking for treatment for a progressively
Yes.
fatal
Yes.
health condition.
Yes. Actually, the state of Oregon was sued by other inmates for lack of treatment for the same condition. When I went over to medium, I was there for 7 months, and I kept writing. That's how you talk to people. You write a kite. And I asked why I was over there, you know, when I was going to start my treatment, and it really made them angry. And finally, I got a response. I think it was 3 or 4 months I was over in medium, and they said that they would better be able to monitor my progress in medium. Well, the whole time I was there, I never saw a doctor. I never saw a nurse. I didn't see anybody.
Monitor your progress.
So they didn't monitor very closely. It was just a punishment, and that's what you get if you rock the boat. You learn very quickly what you can and cannot do. It's traumatic. When you go in, you expect things. Well, you know, you're a human being, so you can ask questions, and you can find out how things work. You don't ask. You just shut up and let things happen to you.
Yeah.
Ask other inmates. That's what you have to do. You have to ask other inmates how things work, or you will be lost, because they will not explain anything to you.
So it'll be interesting to see with the election, with the measure that went through in terms of looking, you know, certain repeat offenders, particularly for certain drug crimes, allegedly access to treatment. So one wonders, okay, there's no treatment where you were, you know, and I was actually chided on a KLCC call-in by Kevin Mannix when I said, you know, there's toxic, I described them as toxic conditions, and he asked, well, where have you been? Well, where I've been is talking with inmates who say access to drugs, you know, street drugs is still available in prison. You alluded to, you know, homemade booze in prison. You know, inmates getting drunk, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, access to drugs, no drug treatment, you know, no sanitation. You got out eventually.
Yes, thank God. And it was difficult. It was.
And because Red Lodge, you know, it should be said, Red Lodge Transition Services. So one of the things you were talking about on the way down was they don't necessarily tell you when you're getting out, or prepare you for the transition out.
No, I answer the phone for Red Lodge right now, and I get calls from the ladies, and they're scared to death. I got a call from a lady I was there with her. I know her very well, and she's getting out in 60 days. Does not know what's going to happen to her, and that's pretty common. I mean, you can not know when you walk out the door what's going to happen. You just know that you have to go see your PO. You might not know where you're going to live, what is going to happen to you, and it's frightening. It almost makes you want to pull back and just stay where you're at, because it's so scary to be out there and not know what's going to happen to you. You know, are you going to have any resources at all? Some of our ladies come out, and if they don't have family members to provide clothing for them, they go out in a gray sweatsuit, you know, and that's it. That's all they have, and that shouldn't
Prison
have,
issue sweatsuit.
Prison issue, and you know, how embarrassing is that? It's humiliating enough to know you were in there. I mean, you already feel like when you get out that you got the big C on your back. Yes, I'm a convict, you know, and to add to it with clothing, that you're just discounted. You're discounted at every turn. We all know when we step out that there are very few people that really care whether or not we survive. And some of my friends have not survived. I've had two very dear friends, one that was extremely close to me, die since they've been out. One of our ladies was murdered, specifically because she didn't have a safe place to go.
Yeah.
You can't just throw away people because they've made mistakes, and usually their mistakes were under the influence of drugs or alcohol. You know, we're still human beings, and a lot of people don't care whether or not we're human beings. They don't see us as that. They just see us as a problem to get rid of, and folks don't understand eventually we will get out. So how we are treated in there and out here is makes a big difference on how we can impact society. We have got some terrifically talented people that can give to our communities, that can make a difference in people's lives. But when you're released and you know that people think you are nothing, all you want to do is go back. I mean, it's harsh out here. Not that I want to go back to Coffee Creek. No, thank you.
Please.
But no, that will never happen for me. But to go back, to get out and know that it doesn't matter to anybody whether you're out, whether you succeed. That was one of my things when I got out, is it does matter to me. It matters to me, every single one of those people in there, that they succeed.
Well, they're faces and they're real people to you, and
they are. And that was the major shock when I went to prison. You know, I expected I was so afraid. I was so afraid. It's like, oh, what are these women are going to be horrible, you know. I became like a mom to a lot of them, being older, and I became a friend to others. They're human beings. Yeah. You take away the drugs, you take away the alcohol, they're somebody's daughter, they're somebody's mother. You know, they're not evil people.
Right.
And that's, you feel like that when you come out, that you're lower than low. And so anything that folks can do to help somebody not feel that you are lower than low, because you're beaten down in there. There isn't, you know, you talked about the treatment program. I worked in the education department on the mediums, or on the minimum side, well actually the medium side too. I helped people with resumes and correspondence classes if they could afford them. There were a couple ladies that could afford them, and so they did those. The treatment, the ladies over in treatment underwent trauma being in treatment.
Right.
And that, to me, is horrendous.
Because of the type of treatment they were getting.
Because of the type of treatment. It was horrible. They would come into my office and just burst into tears, not knowing how to handle what was going on.
Can you describe some of that? Because I have my own stories about basically having to do treatment repair, because part of my job is training future drug counselors. So, whether they go into corrections or Serenity Lane or whatever, a lot of times, when you think about, here, when the first time you were on the show, right? We were talking afterwards and before. It's like, well, wait a minute. This is somebody's grandma. This is somebody's mom, right? And it's like, well, you don't look like a convict. Right? Okay, and so what happened to you was, in one sense predictable, in that life happened to you, and America taught you to drown your sorrows. You were doing that, right? Yes. And so, like a crime, when Clinton signed the crime bill, okay, so 50%, this is an FBI stat, 50% of all crime is substance abuse related.
Oh, absolutely. At least.
At least.
Yeah.
Well, let's say, all right. And so they could basically make a case, like with alcohol, that more alcohol outlets, the higher the crime. And of course, the more alcohol outlets in poor neighborhoods, the higher the crime in those neighborhoods. So life happens, you're not a criminal. You weren't born a criminal, not a multiple criminal background.
No.
Life just happened. You had double hit, and okay, you characterize it as a crime, but okay, you're in the midst of a disease, so that's it. Yes. So here you are doing treatment repair in prison because people are being traumatized and not given skills by the people that are supposed to be helping them. Describe what you were doing.
Oh, what
the kind of things you were dealing with.
Well, I know in the treatment center when the ladies would come in. Oh, okay. For example, one of the ladies, when you're in treatment, you have a bathroom buddy. I don't know why, but they have the bathroom buddy. So this lady is in a wheelchair. She goes into the restroom, hangs her glasses up, comes out, washes her hands, remembers that she doesn't have her glasses, rolls back in, gets her glasses, and leaves. At the next community meeting, you sit in the middle of the circle, and you put your hands underneath your legs, and you cannot say anything, because if you say anything, that's justifying. That's making small of whatever, but anyway, you can't defend yourself. So one of the ladies came in front of her, stood up, and because she's sitting, you have to sit in the chair, and of course she was in a wheelchair, and told her how concerned she was that she hadn't washed her hands before she left the bathroom. Humiliated her and embarrassed her, and what was horrible is that she couldn't say, "You just didn't see." What really happened is, she couldn't explain. So it's like, that's a small thing, but it was huge because it was so embarrassing and humiliating.
Right.
You have people in the treatment, I don't know if demanding is maybe too strong of a word.
Well, it's not too strong a word. I recognize the technology you're talking about. So it's basic, it's a basic confrontational, like Synanon game from 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
Okay, that's kind of discredited now. That's not current practice. It's not therapeutic.
They need to go back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
because things like that happen all the time. They, the Native community in the prison is very tight. Well, when the girls,
you'd have to be.
Yeah, we do. We have to be. And so when part of our ladies went over to the treatment center, you can have no contact with general population when you're in the treatment center. Well, at first they put all the natives in one room together, and they felt comfortable, and it was good for them.
Yeah.
But apparently they didn't like that. So because they were...
Well, that's basic culturally competent practice, which, wow, the state of Oregon, I sat on commissions that said everybody was supposed to be doing that, receiving state funding.
They moved them out because they were getting too close.
Yes.
You know,
who knows what you minorities are talking about in your segregated groups. You might actually be formulating your own healing. So in terms of looking at that, how do art and culture assist rehabilitation? Because what was therapeutic about those groups, and then once you get out, because it should be said, you're creating your own treatment, essentially, your own adjunctive treatment, both inside and also out, which is what, part of what, when you buy a piece of art from Red Lodge, you are helping to fund those efforts in prison. So it should be said that, this has been a tradition that's been going on in the Native community for 30 years. You're not the first group to do it, but that's part of what, we need to basically emphasize with go down, see the art walk, buy some art, and you'll be helping, a therapeutic community that's culturally appropriate in a state that doesn't necessarily recognize cultural appropriateness, but yeah.
Well, for me,
how does art and culture assist rehabilitation?
It's the key. It is the key. When you're in there, the culture is the answer. For Native people, I believe that with all my heart, or I wouldn't be involved with Red Lodge at all.
Yeah.
There is a hole in the spirit of Native people over everything that has happened, not
over
only
the last
in
500 years. Yeah.
Yes, not only in our grandparents, great-grandparents' lives, but in our own lives. There are holes and damage that has to be repaired. And the only way, in my opinion...
I remember this one. This one is called Dancing with the Stars.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Handsome Dog Creek.
Handsome Dog, right.
Yes. Beautiful work. But the only way that people can survive is, in my opinion, is my people need to go back home. We need to go back home. We need to go back to our elders. We need to go back to our teachings. And it's difficult to do that because our parents didn't know. Our grandparents didn't know. They were shipped off to boarding schools. Yeah. As far as in the prison, when you see those women inside the lodge and laying our hurts down and singing our songs, you know that's what is going to heal them. That's what's going to make the difference. The art, you put yourself into it, and not only do you put you can put your hurts into your art, you can also send it out.
Yeah.
You can share that with other people, because isolation is very, you can't, like I was talking about, you can't share in prison. You can't, you're not supposed to share anything in prison. We all do, but we're not supposed to.
But the art becomes kind of like a common symbology, because if we look at some of the themes that were there, you know, the bear skin and the bear, and, you know, Dancing with the Stars and eagles and medicine wheels, and, you know, basically powwows and, you know, things that people remember, you know, the salmon, you know, especially if you're salmon people, you know, definitely a Northwest theme, you know, the fact that this comes out of prison, right, crushing your spirit, and basically it's an image that you can talk about in terms of shared experience, since you're not allowed to share verbally.
Yeah, and well, I did it anyway. I had some money and I bought some beads while I was in there, and I started beading. And you can see the hunger in the young girls, you know, the hunger for creating something beautiful, something that is beautiful.
When you say young girls, how old are we talking about?
Oh, anywhere from 19 to 30. Anywhere in there. But they would sit down with me, and I'd give them some beads and some needle and thread, and we would sit there and we would talk while we were beading. And all the talks we were healing. You know, everything. Sometimes we'd listen to some CDs of Native music, but most of the time we'd sit there and we'd talk about not our crimes, but our people and our children and all of these, their mothers. You know, one of the worst things, the hardest things about Coffee Creek was during the holidays. And I don't know, I know they were trying to make us feel better, but they would put a Christmas tree with lights in the corner, and those lights would be on all night, and it was absolutely horrendous. You would hear women crying because they knew what they had lost. You know, none of them meant to do this. They didn't start out going, geez, I think I will destroy my life, neglect my children, and go to Coffee Creek for a vacation. You know, nobody did that. And so the healing that we get from whatever art form it is, if we don't have that, we'll come out less than what we were when we even went in, which was horrendous. You got to be pretty broken to go to prison.
And can we flash the last slide up there? Because when you're talking about, for example, you know, talking with the girls and sharing stories and sharing culture, not that last slide, the slide that you had up before, had the last part of the schedule, because that's good to talk about, you know, contacting. Yeah, right. Thanks. So I've seen Ed Edmo as a storyteller, and you know, he's tells some fairly classic stories, even though they seem to be the same, a lot of the same ones. That's good, because repetition means that other people get to carry it on. And then also looking at Cornell, the Native American musician, later that same day on the 22nd, and Native American survivors of incarceration, which, you know, people telling their stories and putting a face to that.
I'll be there.
All right, so there's Ed.
Yes.
And so, you know, if you got some other slides of some of the folks, some of the inmates in the groups at Coffee Creek, and also the men, right? Because we need to put a face to folks.
This is during the Foods Feast.
And what's going on? What's going on at the Foods Feast?
Well, the Longhouse people have been very generous and bring their ceremony into us, and so they do their ceremony for us, and we are fed spiritual foods. These foods have been prayed over, and they bring them in, and it is one of the most moving experiences I have ever experienced, to be with the Longhouse people.
So this is Coffee Creek, huh?
This is Coffee Creek. Yes, I know those ladies. I love those ladies. There's Tyler Barlow. The lady
next to Tyler. Okay. So flash the last one with contact info for Red Lodge, if you would. Yeah. So Red Lodge Transition Services can be reached at that P.O. Box in Portland and at that cell phone number 503-245-4175.
Yes, they will talk to me.
You'll get Myrna.
Yes.
And also just show the gallery address too, if you would. So once more, ongoing Native American art, empowers invisible people art show, 174 West Broadway, Eugene. Coming up this First Friday Art Walk. You can visit, take a gander at the art, take some home with you, and spread the word.
Absolutely. All these funds that come from the art auction and the art shows that we do are for a Native Women's Transitions House. So that when our women come out,
place to live once you get out.
What a
Wow.
novelty, you know,
Yeah.
what a thing to think about.
Yeah.
But we need something that is culturally appropriate for us. We're, you know, on the whole, we're not Christians, and it's good that there are homes out there, but we need something for our people. And so all the funds, that's what it's going for, so that we can buy a home, so we can have a home.
Yeah. I mean, and actually have, you know, something culturally appropriate in terms of treatment, because essentially, given the history of this state, which was not necessarily founded on, you know, respecting native sovereignty. I mean, we're sitting in Lane Community College, named for an Indian fighter. Right. So
Yes.
The history certainly of the place doesn't lend itself to respecting culture. So, you know, by and large, when you say people aren't being Christian, it's because Christianity was forced upon them, and our life ways are older than Christianity in the first place, and they were disrupted as part of, you know, what can only be described as weaponized Christianity, because it's not something that Jesus would do. Because Jesus wouldn't kill Aztec babies or lead armies. So all that stuff was done. So when you disrupt a culture, you know, we're still dealing with some of the after effects. And so when people try and create their own healing in the midst of a prison and produce, you know, beautiful works of art, and then prepare people for the transition out and have some place for them to go.
Well, we hope that it would be a place where we have elders that'll come and speak with the women, that we have, you know, we'll have our own lodge. We'll have, you know, we'll be able to go and sweat. And eventually that's what I would like to see happen, is that when a woman gets out, she has nothing to do for the first month, and that she can come and she can cleanse herself and go into the lodge and go to the lodge every night and do her prayers and talk to some elders and create that healing, because just getting out by itself is a big trauma. It's a whole nother issue for people to deal with, and then when you add on children, and you're supposed to find a job right away and restitution, and it is so overwhelming. I'm surprised more people don't go back than what do. You have to have that spiritual peace, or it won't work.
Right. And that spiritual peace has to be culturally appropriate for you.
It does.
And if it isn't, then certainly we've seen that you know, whatever gains that you have gotten in treatment don't stick. You know, and certainly it's clear that if the correction has not occurred if they're not doing basic sanitation. You know, if treatment basically is not being therapeutic and having you look at your issues while being detoxed in a supportive, safe, supportive way, not the confrontative, you know, you didn't call it sin and non-gain, but I recognize what it is because I've been in the field for 38 years, and you know, Synanon doesn't exist anymore because it's toxic. It was toxic then. It's basically, you know, prison inmates being confrontational with each other, which is not a therapeutic mode that works, that has any
No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for them. You can talk to them. There's some women that will stop treatment and go back just because they can't take anymore.
Right. So, any final thoughts?
Oh, come down and buy some artwork. I want a home for these women, you know. And it's beautiful. These men and women are tremendous artists.
Yes.
And they've got to come down and look. They've got to come down and see it.
I want to copy that Dancing with the Stars.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, I did get a couple of pieces, and also from Kyla Smith, who is Al Smith's daughter.
Yes.
Wasn't incarcerated, but you know.
She's supporting us.
She's supporting the effort. So if you like what you've seen, or if you didn't like what you've seen, tell a friend about this show and the show ongoing, DiversiTV. We air every Wednesday night during regular LCC terms with reruns frequently. Email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put DiversiTV in the subject line, and someone will get back to you or just give us feedback. I want to thank you, Myrna, for coming on the show again.
Appreciate it.
It was really great.
Thank you.
So,
I was nervous.
Hey,
it's okay.
It's okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. This has been DiversiTV. I'm Mark Harris. Go well, stay well.